So this episode, I got to sit down with my friend Will Spencer. We talked about the red pill movement, manosphere, feminism, modern dating, how to be successful as a young man. I had a fantastic time talking to Will, and I hope you enjoy this conversation even half as much as I enjoyed having it. Before you get started, be sure to subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell so you're notified when more episodes just like this drop. Roll the film. But anyways, thank you for joining, Will. So obviously today there's a lot of talk about modern dating, kind of the direction it's going. There's a lot of young men and young women out here struggling to find a good partner, struggling to find someone that's going to stick around and be loyal and be faithful. Dating today is very self-serving, it feels like, at least from what I've experienced and many other friends that I have experienced. Content I've watched online, it seems to be very negative as far as dating goes. And so today's discussion is basically going to be that, like, what is going on in modern dating and how do we navigate this, especially as Christians? So I don't know if you want to take the floor and give a little bit of a synopsis of what you think is happening in modern dating and why it's so challenging today.
Yeah. So just for listeners, I mentioned a moment ago, maybe you'll add that in, but I'm engaged now. And so my wedding is in less than 2 months. And so my fiance and I were courting for about 8 months, and then we got engaged on Good Friday. And so the things that I'm going to be talking about tonight are things that I have firsthand experience with. I know that there are a lot of men who were blessed to get married, a long time ago. Maybe they have a bunch of kids. And so the changes in the modern dating environment, both the secular world and also the Christian world, which is what we're talking about, they're not really aware of them because they haven't been subject to them. And things have changed very quickly just in the past 5 years, but probably more like accelerating beginning 10 years ago. So I was as much in that as anybody else. When I started my podcast, it's now the Will Spencer podcast, willspencer.co. When I started my podcast, it was called The Renaissance of Men. It was about this global rebirth of masculinity, and that's a subject that I've been studying to various degrees for 25 years. I started in 2001, actually, and we can talk about that if you'd like.
Yeah, definitely.
And so this is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. When I started my podcast in 2020, when it was called The Renaissance of Men, I was on X, but I didn't, or Twitter at the time. I didn't spend a ton of time there. I spent most of my time on Instagram, and that was where a lot of my fellow content creators were. I came up through the manosphere. I've encountered a lot of red pill stuff. I've talked to a lot of MGTOW guys, and started digging into feminism and seeing the problems with women, and then on the other side, seeing a lot of the problems with men as well. And so a lot of that fed into my own sanctification, coming to see the answers are in Christ. So everything that I'm going to be talking about today is stuff that I have long experience. This is not a new topic for me. So I've been going over a lot of the stuff in some ways for decades, in some ways for years, right, and built my platform on a lot of it.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback off of that, I think the challenging thing, at least what I'm noticing in modern relationship dynamics, dating, et cetera, is it feels like a new phenomena for so many young men, especially at least that I've interacted with myself at times, where we're looking around at the landscape, we're looking at people, even in our family who've been married for a long time, who, whether it's our grandparents or our parents or uncles and aunts and things like that, and we're seeing how seemingly easy it was for them to find someone to settle down and to stick together. Mm-hmm. And then we're looking at dating today, and we're asking ourselves, what is going on? Like, why, what happened? How did it get to this point?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can give a little bit of a history, I guess, of how it's gotten here from your perspective.
Yeah. So my take on it is that feminism is a civilizational kill shot, and the gun was fired 150 years ago. The gun has already gone off. And so that was in the late 1800s, probably. Let's say feminism began spreading through the West in the late 1800s, the early 1900s. Flapper girls, women smoking cigarettes, things like that. These were a lot of the early manifestations. And first wave feminism was occultic in nature. And there's a couple books about that. You can buy the book Occult Feminism by Rachel Wilson, or Rachel Wilson's an Eastern Orthodox. You can buy The End of Women, which by Carrie Gress. Carrie Gress is a Catholic. I haven't read End of Women, but I've heard very good things. She was interviewed by Tom Ascol about that. Tom Ascol, of course, of Founders Ministries. And during the course of that interview, at the end of that interview, it was amazing to hear. Tom was like, yeah, I had just always assumed that first wave feminism was good, but you've convinced me that feminism was evil and bad from the very beginning. And this is Tom Askell. He's a very established
Right.
Evangelical leader. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to dissuade people of the fact that feminism was ever good. It was never good. It was never intended to be good. It was never virtuous. It was always driven by occultists and antichrist female leaders as well. And so once you see that and you understand the way that it was injected into the heart of the West early on, and then you see the development of feminism through the first half of the 20th century prior to World War II, it begins spreading. Then in World War II, the men go off to war and women are sort of brought into the workforce. And then after World War II, they don't want to leave the workforce. They didn't want to go home. The house got industrialized, and so all of the noble labor that women used to have to do to manage a home became a dishwasher and a vacuum cleaner, became very mechanized and alienating. And so you can kind of understand in that, like, having righteous labor in the marketplace became the goal for many women. And then you had the 1960s, sexual liberation, the birth control pill, no fault divorce, abortion, which enabled sex to be decoupled from procreation. And then things kind of went wild from there. So what we're seeing today is the natural end product of very bad antichrist ideas that were injected into the West 150 years ago, and that have worked their way into the hearts of women, primarily centered around a root of bitterness, and so around like patriarchal oppression, stuff like that, patriarchy essentially. And so that root wrapped itself around women's hearts in the 20th century. But the reason why things are so difficult now and getting more difficult is the response to that in men has begun generating bitterness also. That was the early days of, and this is where my podcast came from. You can look back in the 1990s and the early 2000s with what was called game. There's a book called The Game by Neil Strauss, and mystery, pickup artistry, men learning, how to essentially conversational techniques to have one-night stands with women. And that's where the red pill came from, men being disillusioned about women. That's where the manosphere came from. And so now the manosphere has reached, even though through Andrew Tate, it's kind of broached the public dialogue. And what's flavored with a lot of these discussions is this bitterness it flavors a lot of the discussions. So what makes things so difficult now is you have multi-generational feminism that has embittered the hearts of many women and made them suspicious of men. And now you have men who are having chauvinism is probably the best word for it, who are also becoming embittered against women. And so that's the really dangerous part, where men look around and say, where are all the good women, because they meet all these bitter women of feminists to various degrees. Right. And women look, and I similarly will talk to women and they'll say, all I meet is bitter and angry men. And I think that's undeniably happening now in a lot of the resentment, a lot of the neo-Nazi stuff that's going on. And so that's why things are so difficult right now, is that everyone has been embittered towards each other. And maybe that was the point of feminism. It's certainly the point of occultism.
I was just going to ask if that was leading right into my next question there. Like, do you think that's the point of feminism, in a sense, is to stoke that reaction in men and to get the genders to hate each other? So we're not procreating, and we're not coming together in holy unions in marriage, and we're not forming healthy communities and families as a result, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that's kind of the underlying goal and agenda of it in the first place?
Absolutely. I mean, that was the first thing that Satan did, was he tried to divide men from women, Adam from Eve in the garden, right? To try and have women have Eve eat the forbidden fruit, and Adam to remain passive in the face of that. That was the seduction. And so if you can divide the fundamental union between man and woman, it's as powerful, I think, as dividing Christ from his church, because husbands are called to love their wives as Christ loved the church. So if you can drive a wedge in there and crack them apart, you can crack civilization in half. And that's essentially what's going on right now. That was probably the point. That I'm going to imagine that was Satan's purpose. It may not have been any individual person's purpose, but many of them it was.
Yeah, and I think that the devil's obviously crafty, and he works through people who otherwise believe they're sincere in order to push ideas and push movements that are destructive ultimately to humanity, to our relationships with one another, and ultimately to our relationships with God. And I think this is something, at least that I've noticed, is speaking of modern relationships and dating, is it seems to be very self-serving. I don't know if you've experienced that in the past, or I'm sure many viewers that are going to be watching this have experienced that, where when you're in and I've been guilty of this too at times in the past, where I've been the one that's been selfish and hasn't been honoring God how I should. But that seems to be a trend. Like that seems to be the norm almost. There's the exception to the rule seems to be self-sacrifice in service of others in relationship. And it can be very discouraging. I'm sure a lot of people feel discouraged that are, experiencing this today, including myself at times. And so what would you say to especially young men who are frustrated, who are tempted to take the red pill, you could say? What would you say to them to encourage them to resist that temptation? I guess a better question to start would be, what is the red pill and why is this so tempting to men in the first place? And then we'll get to that.
Yeah. So the red pill is, in the sense that we're talking about it here, is an understanding of what's called the sexual marketplace. The sexual marketplace being like the what we might call the dating environment, the courting environment. So for many years, 30, 40 years, the nature of men's and women's sexual attraction has been kept somewhat hidden. And so men who, starting in the 70s, probably, maybe the 60s, probably more like it, is that men have been taught that because of patriarchal oppression, women like nice guys. Men have been mean for centuries, and so now women want nice guys to treat them well and be not self-sacrificing, because there's a righteous form of self-sacrificing. But I would say like the nice guy is a man who's
like a pushover.
A pushover, yeah, and that's not the same as being self-sacrificing. There's a subtle difference there we can explore. So that's what many men were told. And for men who grew up in environments of single mothers who no fault divorced their fathers, where the mother would say, "Your father was terrible. He was so mean, and we're separated, poisoned their sons mothers poisoned their sons against their fathers." It was a convincing message. And then you have the rise of the dopey dad in media: Homer Simpson, Ray Romano, Tim Allen from Tool Time. It began with All in the Family with Archie Bunker in the late 1960s. So you see masculinity being ridiculed for the most part in everyday life. And then on the other side, of course, you see these pumped up, roided super soldiers, which are these almost fictitious stanzas of masculinity. And so what that did is it led men to think, okay, well, I guess I have to be a nice guy. And so they're nice, and they don't care about their own needs. They sacrifice themselves unrighteously. But then they discover that the same girl who said, well, I just want a nice guy, will break up with them for the sexy, reckless bad boy. And then he'll break their heart and abuse them. And then they come back to the nice guy. And then,
just
women bounce.
Cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so the red pill, in the early 2000s, sought to explain why that is. And a big reason is the differing notions of protection versus provision. Like the idea of providing for a woman versus protecting her. They're like physically protecting her.
Right.
There's some overlap there, but they can also be divided. And so this is where you get the whole conversation about alphas and betas and all that different stuff. And so the red pill seeks to kind of articulate that dynamic, that women themselves have also been divided from their own natures. And so they'll spend their 20s, with the reckless bad boys, and then they'll turn 30 and start thinking about settling down, and then they'll go for the beta, but always long for the alpha guy, who they were with earlier in their lives. And so the red pill tries to explain why that is, and how that works, and what men can do in response. Now, these are true observations. They're accurate observations that women want both protection and provision. The problem comes because we no longer disciple women for marriage. We have accepted as a societal norm that a woman will go to college and she will have her career and she'll work for a number of years until she's about 30, and then she'll settle down and then maybe start having kids when she's like 35. Right. And so society has just accepted, well, that's just what women do, because if you tell young girls to get married and be mothers, that's patriarchal oppression. So you have this big 10-year gap in girls' lives where they should be settling down with a good and godly man and building a family, right? And contributing to building a household with a man leading. Instead, you have them just kind of out there on their own doing the whole Sex and the City thing. And it's that fundamental societal assumption that is driving a ton of this. And that is a giant problem inside the evangelical Christian church that I can take that all apart, where they've accepted the fundamental premise of feminism that a woman just needs to have time to herself where she isn't obligated to any man. And that's a lie. Same with men, I should add, by the way. Like,
Right.
we're supposed to be getting married earlier, much earlier than we do. And we can argue about dates, whether 18, 22, 25, what we can pick a range, but we're not supposed to be waiting until 30, 35 to get married. But we've accepted this fundamental assumption that, well, we have to liberate women from men because men are unreliable and abusive and patriarchal and oppressive. So she needs some time to establish herself before she gives herself to a man. I don't think that's true at all. But because we've accepted that premise, and that is a fundamental premise of the West right now, because we've accepted that premise, you end up with women with these split natures, where it's like, well, I want the sexy, reckless bad boy, but then I want the nice guy to take care of me. And so they bounce back and forth between those two guys all throughout their 20s until they finally reluctantly settle down somewhere in their early 30s, God willing. But some women wait too long and they get to 35, 40 and they find that, it's very difficult. And so all of these dynamics together are what we find ourselves in the middle in. And the last thing I want to say is, the problem with the red pill is that it doesn't offer a way out. It just says, this is the way things are. They're terrible and they're awful, and you just got to make it work. And then the red pill becomes the black pill.
And it denigrates marriage too. I've noticed it's this, like, you'd think that guys that are trying to beat this whole new age postmodern phenomena, you think that they would be promoting marriage. That seems to be the antidote out of this stuff, is commitment and love and loyalty to somebody. And from the male perspective, being competent enough to protect and to provide and to do all these things that God calls us to do. From the female perspective, learning how to love and to serve and to be nurturing and to be feminine in every godly sense that they're supposed to be. And instead, what do we have? They're like encouraging the very thing that's leading to the problem in the first place, which is women should be promiscuous, or men should be promiscuous, and women should kind of just be objects for men's promiscuous use. And, the rules are not equal, and men should actually be abusive in a sense to women, is kind of the message that I see from guys like Andrew Tate, especially.
Yeah.
And it's just, you look at this stuff and it's hard to know what to do about it. And it's hard to know how to fight back against this stuff exactly. And so what would you say to young men who are staring this in the face, who are being tempted, like with that, the ring of power sitting in front of them, where you can have all the authority and the power back in your life and in society, and you can take back, the power dynamic within your relationships with women? What would you say to them as far as, seeing that ring of power staring them in the face? What would you say to them that would encourage them to not put it on, to not put that ring on, to not take that pill?
That is a wonderful question. And to answer it, I want to take a step back to something you said. You said women are encouraged to love and to serve. And that is the key word. Women are not taught, girls are not taught that to serve a household. That whole idea is anathema to our society. Right. A woman should serve herself. In fact, women will tell you this, that they will be little girls, sometimes even teenage girls, and they'll say, I just want to be a wife and mother. And they'll get viciously shamed by the women around them. How dare you? Right? And so it's not just that you have men, fathers, buying into the feminist paradigm, like, well, my daughter needs a life to herself. I want her to have her own career fulfillment. It's not just that, though that is very much part of it. It's that women have been taught that loyalty to women, to the sisterhood, is their highest and most primary loyalty, and not to ever trust men. And so when a woman says, a girl says, I want to be a wife and mother, it's the women in their lives, often their mothers, grandmothers, etc., that land on them. So girls are like, well, my own mother and the women around me, my friends, are telling me not to do this, so I think I should go in that direction. And so it's up to individual girls and women to unwind that within themselves. That's their responsibility, because their responsibility is to God. Are you going to carry that root of bitterness before the Lord, you as a woman, and say like, well, this guy was mean to me, so I get to be this way? It's like, no, that's not the case, actually.
Right.
That's definitely not the case. In fact, Christianity is so unique amongst world religions in that Jesus specifically goes directly to women and to children and does not need them to be mediated through a man. The hemorrhaging woman is a great example. The woman at the well, Mary and Martha. All throughout the New Testament, Jesus shocks the disciples by speaking directly to women and valuing children as well, meaning they don't need a mediator of a man to be their, like meaning a husband or a father to be their savior. Women can approach the throne directly. Other religions of the world are not like that. And so women have this opportunity uniquely in Christianity for redemption. But what Christianity says in response to them is you have a specific role in the household, and that glorifies God. And so if you can hold on to your root of bitterness and you can go pursue whatever you want out there, but if you're going to be here and you're going to serve God truly, this is what's asked of you. And so there's a death to self, a self-sacrificial aspect of that, which our society is. You said that
the death of self.
That's right.
That's right. That's the part that is completely lost on our secular society. It's all about you. It's all about my needs being met. And is this person making me feel good? And is this person, meeting whatever it is? It's all about you. It's all about how they're serving you, not how you can serve them. And,
that's right. Or how you can serve God. And that's the important thing. It's like, do we really believe what the Bible says about men and women? Do we really believe that? Do we believe it is God honoring? I don't have my Bible in the room, but I have Ephesians 5. I have a little bookmark in Ephesians 5 that talks about this. And there are, of course, many other passages as well. Do we believe that? And I think a lot of people are like, no, I don't actually believe that. I don't like that. That makes me sad and mad and angry. Right. And I think that's our culture. But you asked about men putting on the ring of power. The only way to avoid putting on the ring of power in that regard, it's like, you know what, I'm going to take back the power and I'm going to be fascist or proto-fascist or whatever. And the only way to avoid that is to rejoice in all circumstances and to understand that we don't set the tone and the tenor of the times that we are born into. And part of life as a faithful Christian is to accept that circumstances are not going to line up in your life the way that you want, whether it be in your immediate circumstances or in the grand historical narrative, the moment that we find ourselves in. It's like, yeah, okay, 50 or 70 years ago, it was much easier to get married, 30 years ago even. That is not the case today. So is the response to that from an individual man going to be, I'm going to take power and I'm going to fix things, or I'm going to jump on board with the guy who is going to fix things,
right?
Darn it, right? I don't know, right? Or is it going to be like, I submit willingly to the will of God for this moment, and I preserve my moral character in faithfulness and humility and sanctification, and do not let circumstances make me bitter, and trust that if I repent before the Lord, I stay in prayer and scripture reading and continue to go about my daily responsibilities faithfully and with a joyful attitude, that God will bring me a woman who has the exact same attitude that I do. Right. That is the answer. But it means that you can't be powerful in the sense that you look at like an Andrew Tate, right? Or you look at many different Hollywood heroes or whatever. You don't get to be that guy, because that's not Christianity. I'm sorry. And this is why Christianity is so galling for so many quote unquote masculine men, because Christianity demands a certain degree of uncertainty with regard to ourselves that the Nietzschean bros don't have. A Nietzschean bro says, my will to power is the only responsibility I have, and I am certain that's it. And so I'm going to go express my will in the world. Right. And there's a certainty for that, a reassuring certainty. It's a terrible idea, but we can often be very certain of terrible ideas. Christianity requires always be examining yourself to see if you're in the faith. You are supposed to question yourself. You are supposed to have righteous self-doubt. You are supposed to know that the heart is deceitfully wicked, and just because your heart says something doesn't mean it's true. And you ask God for the answer. And maybe you have to wait. Maybe you have to exist in the uncertainty for days or weeks or even months of not having an answer, but trusting God to give you one.
And so I think that's and I think that's sanctifying. I think that's the sanctifying work of the Holy Spirit in a believer's life, is going through situations that suck and remaining faithful. That is the
That's
test of your faith. That's a test of the authenticity of your faith. Faith is not tested when things are going exactly how you want, when the circumstances in your life are lining up exactly how you want. It's tested when they're not. And it's tested in your response to that. And it's exactly what you said, I think, where being content in all circumstances doesn't mean that you're happy in an earthly way that the circumstance is happening. That's not contentment. Contentment is trusting that the Lord is good no matter what, and that, even if you're not getting let's say you do desire marriage, or you do desire, I mean, this applies to anything, a certain job or whatever it might be. Pick a bad circumstance in your life. If you're desiring that, that's not a bad thing to desire, but it's bad to idolize that and then to set your hope on whether or not you attain that goal. And I think that contentment is understanding that no matter if I attain that goal, that the Lord is still good, and that he's still faithful, and that he will work all things out for good, and that he will sanctify us in the image of his son. That's exactly what we're supposed to be shooting for, I think. So I just think that's been entirely lost, even in the church, at least from what I've seen.
Well, and I really appreciate you saying that, because you helped put some pieces together for me. I think that right now there's become a certain idolatry of the 1950s lifestyle, not the 1950s as such, but to say like the wife and the kids and the house and the retirement fund and
the white picket
all
fence and
and those are wonderful things, and all of those things are goods in themselves. But I think a lot of men, they look at where they're at in their lives, whether it be their early 20s or 30s or whatever, and they compare themselves to this materialistic standard that's unique in all of history, really. And they're like, I don't have that. Why don't I have that? I deserve that. All these circumstances are so unjust, and they're set up by elites and power and globalism, and they're depriving me of having that. Now, to some extent, the desire for a wife and kids and family and security and stability, all of those things are good things. But when you look at circumstances, that are preventing you from achieving them, what is your response to that? Is it to get bitter and say, I deserve that, and these people are keeping me from that, and so I'm going to overthrow those people so that I can have the thing? Or is the response to say, to turn inwards and turn self-reflective and say, well, am I really right before the Lord? Am I really properly handling my own life and the responsibilities in front of me? And what I said long before right-wing wokeness or right-wing extremism was a thing, my response to left-wing wokeness was this. I said this for years. Okay, let's grant the point that there is white supremacy that's keeping you down, whoever you happen to be. What would we find if we spent 30 days and we monitored every dollar you spent and every 15 minutes? What would we see over the course of that 30 days? That the white man or whatever patriarchy is holding you down, or are your own choices holding you down equally? And I think and that's the thing. When you tell that to men, especially today, well, you just don't understand how much we've suffered. It's like, maybe I do, but maybe there's some righteous self-reflection that we're called to do as Christians. That's the standard that we're accountable to. Don't worry about the secular guy. Let the Nietzschean bro go do what he's going to do. Psalms talk about his fate. Who are you before God? And, unfortunately, that is not a popular message with men who call themselves Christians. But it's not. It's not.
It's wild that it's crazy, because I mean there's so much good that you said right there. I think that the church, at least what I've experienced and what I've seen and what I've studied and all this, and we've had conversations about this in the past, it's like they've adopted the same secular feminist worldview that the world has now embraced in many ways, and it's making it really, really difficult for both men and women to actually see things from a biblical perspective, because they're not even hearing a biblical perspective about exactly the thing that you're saying here from their pastors and from their church leaders and from so many conference speakers or whatever it might be. And it leaves men with nowhere to go, in a sense. I mean, obviously, we're supposed to first and foremost go to the scriptures, and if people were doing that in the first place, we wouldn't be in this situation. But I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's frustrating to watch. I'll tell you that.
It's incredibly frustrating to watch, because it feels like just in the past 5 years, the evangelical church was blind to a lot of these feminist issues, largely blind. Of course, there have been many faithful churches and leaders over many years, but there have been many very faithful men that have explicitly avoided the topic of the family. Like that is also true. And it's like all of a sudden the lights came on and everyone suddenly sees it everywhere. And the response wasn't like, okay, let's slow down. Let's not overreact. Let's respond. But instead, the lights come on and people go immediately for the axe on the wall, the fire escape, and they start hacking away at everything. It's like, no, guys, stop. And I can understand. I can understand if the secular world is like that. But in the Christian life, we have the scriptures which are objectively clear and explicit about the standards that we have to hold to as Christians. Period. It is not obscure. And that's why I did an episode with Dr. Jared Longshore about J.C. Ryle's book, Holiness, is that book is a classic written in the 1800s by a man who was, by all accounts, a true man's man, J.C. Ryle, about these are the standards, these are the objective standards that we are accountable to as Christians, long before our current era of degeneracy.
Right.
And so I can understand a man in the secular world, because I've been around many of them, who don't believe in a transcendent standard. Power, do what thou wilt, power is the only measure, right? Go and acquire that. I get that. But for Christians, like, we have the standard of the scriptures that tells women who they're supposed to be and who men who they're supposed to be and who they are in relation to each other. And that standard is still there, but that standard is getting thrown out the window because we got to win or whatever. It's like, okay, and that's the hardest thing for me to understand. I mean, I get it. I do understand. I don't mean to say that like it's inexplicable. Of course it's explicable. It's very human. It's a very human response. But the challenge of the Christian life is we're supposed to do almost supernatural level standards, which we will always fall short in. And that's why we need sanctification of the Holy Spirit and repentance. But we're still called to strive for this almost supernatural standard. Yeah. And that is ultimately far more righteous and godly than descending down into the muck of, I got to get mine, which is, I think, what's really going on.
And standards that don't make sense to our flesh. Kind of, as I think kind of the point there, it's like a biblical ethic and a biblical standard for how we're supposed to live and how we're supposed to love others and how we're supposed to serve and all of these things. The standard of holiness, it doesn't make any sense to our flesh. It's contrary to the flesh directly. Yes. And it could, because it's not self-serving, it's not self-satisfying in that regard. And I think the response, what we were seeing with the red pill guys is, and sadly, even many people that are claiming to be Christians, is they're having a fleshly response to a spiritual problem. And then they're wondering why it's not panning out how they want and why they're constantly let down and why the relationships that they are pursuing don't tend to work out and these sorts of things. And why sleeping around with people isn't satisfying. Like, hello.
Yeah. Well, they have pastors and influencers that are egging them on.
Exactly.
Right? That are either egging them on explicitly or implicitly, or at least not correcting and rebuking them, because you can take advantage of a worked up man in the same way that you can take advantage of an embittered woman. Like it's very easy to get, when someone is in their flesh, it's very easy to push their buttons and get them to respond and believe that you are the answer, that you have the answers. And that's a cult of personality. That's exactly how the manosphere worked. I walked through that whole world. I met all those guys, and all they had done is built little cults of personality around themselves that are quite profitable, but that lead men, they're false teachers. They're hired hand shepherds. They flee, right? And many of the men in that world were quite corrupt. And it was very sad to see, because this was in the early days of my Christian life. I had spent 20 years thinking about masculinity, and I found my way into this world of men who had built successful platforms talking about the same thing. I met them all. I worked on a documentary in 2021. The Renaissance of Men was supposed to be a documentary. I did a 14,000-mile road trip across the U.S., did 25 interviews, met many of these men, their families, stayed in their houses. That was 2021. By summer 2022, the manosphere had exploded and collapsed into the ocean because Andrew Tate had eaten everybody's lunch. He was the guy who ascended to, for better or worse, ascended into the public eye. And so all these men turned and went to Andrew Tate and signed up for his war room, and all this money got vacuumed out of the manosphere. And then all these men's sins came to the fore, and they all collapsed because they had no foundation. And so I've watched this dynamic. I've watched this dynamic play out. When you play Nietzschean power games, there will always be another bigger, stronger, fitter bro who comes along. You will not be young, fit, and awesome forever. You will lose a step, and then the next barbarian king comes in and he takes your stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how it works, and that's why it doesn't work. And of course, the Old Testament is full of that.
Oh, absolutely. It's just all self-serving at the end of the day. And I think a lot of these red pill guys, they present themselves like they're out here trying to help young men navigate all this crazy feminist stuff. And to your point before, I think that they're in some sense correct about their analysis of feminism and the fact that it's destructive to society and it's ruining relationships and all this stuff. Obviously not totally, because they denigrate marriage itself as a result, just like the feminists do.
That's right.
But I think ultimately it's self-serving, even though Andrew Tate and these guys will present it like, I'm here to help young men. I'm going to help you get what you want. I'm going to help you feel better about your life and take back control of your life. That's not what they're doing, because they're not actually putting the power where it's supposed to be, which is within the Word of God. That's the only way that that's actually going to happen. And not in a self-serving way, but of course there's that paradoxical spiritual reality and spiritual truth that is contrary to the flesh, but they're just appealing to the flesh, and we'll give you what you want here and now.
That's right.
And but like what you said, it's just all about them. It's all about their money and all about their status and all about their success and all about them getting the women they want and all this crazy stuff. Well, they leave you out to dry with no money because they took all of it. It's just, it's crazy.
It's super
absolutely
crazy.
Wild.
And it's entirely predictable. And that's the sad part.
Right.
And it's entirely preventable. Now, look, all of us, you know, that's why I think some of the least talked about commandments are the 9th and 10th commandments that are about coveting. And it's very easy to look at our fathers or our grandfathers, or look at other men around us or whatever, and to covet. And part of coveting is, I think, negatively viewing ourselves in the light of another person and saying like, well, I should have what that person has. Well, you don't have it. And so because you don't have it, so clearly you shouldn't have it. And so the question that then can become, what am I going to do as a man to go about getting it? Am I going to act in my own strength to take it? Because you certainly can. You can grow in the manosphere was all about power, physical, financial, and sexual power. You can grow in your own fleshly power to get those things. And there is nothing wrong with being physically fit. There's nothing wrong with being financially stable or successful. And there's nothing wrong with being like confident around women. All of those things are good. And I believe that those are all reflections of a godly man. But when a man begins using his own power solely to achieve the life that he desires, and he forgets or tries to, I guess if we can use this phrase, override God's will. It's like, you know what, your Lord, YOLO, Leroy Jenkins, I'm going to go do this on my own, and I'm not going to pay attention to what the Word of God says. I'm not going to be humble. I'm not going to be patient. I'm not going to show the fruits of the Spirit. You can do that. You can absolutely do that. But when a man does that, then he starts walking down the Nietzschean path. But as a man grows in strength, a Christian man should learn the value of meekness. Meekness is not weakness. It's unfortunate those two words rhyme so well. Meekness is strength restrained, is that our strength as men has limits, and we acknowledge the limits of our strength, and we do the most that we can. Being physically fit is good because we can have stamina to work longer, right? But that doesn't mean that, you know what, I'm going to use my strength to take that guy's stuff so I get a little bit more. As you do your own righteous labor right up into the point where you're tired, and you trust that if you've served God faithfully and you've glorified Him in your labors all day, He'll take care of the rest. Maybe not on your timeline, maybe not in the way that you want Him to, but you trust that what He gives you, what comes to you by the hand of providence, is good, even if it's not the result that you expected. You glorify God in that because you have God as your Father. Right? Are the things that He gives you not good enough in many ways? Like, well, you submit to His will, but it's only in that place that you as a man can find peace. And that, I think, is the big overlooked variable, is to say, like, a man can labor all throughout the day by the sweat of your brow. You will eat bread. God's curses are legit. But then you know that if you've done that in a way that glorifies God, you have peace and you can put your head down on the pillow at night. And I don't think men understand the value of that peace, of that Christian contentment. In fact, a book that I just ordered is The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment by Burroughs, I believe is the author's name. And I'm looking forward to reading that, because I think we are called to be content in our circumstances and not be combative. As much as social media is trying to gin us up into a combative attitude, finding contentment in the Christian life, I think, is the true blessing here on earth.
That's a great point you made. And I think that leads into a question that I was wanting to ask you is, how has social media, and specifically in regards to dating apps, led to this discontentment among people? And how has that led to all of these problems, or manifested in all of these problems in dating that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, so about social media broadly, before Elon took over X, and before the Trump victory, social media was very tightly controlled. The narrative, the limits of dialogue were tightly controlled. If you said the wrong thing, you get canceled or booted off or whatever. Right. And so people were constrained in what they could say. So now that Elon has taken over, the narrative is no longer constrained, for better or for worse, but instead the narrative is being driven by armies of bots and AI. So they can artificially create, again, there were videos going around yesterday on X of all these server farms with all these phones and stuff. Did you see that?
Yep.
Right. Where artificial herds of people can be created to drive the narrative in a particular direction. So now anything goes, but you have millions of bots potentially who are driving conversation a particular way. And so it's very easy for people who spend too much time online to think that these organic phenomena are happening by men they may consider their bros.
They think it's organic because they don't see the censorship happening, so they just assume that it is. Yeah. But it's just as non-organic, I believe, as if there were just outright overt censorship happening to stop certain narratives.
Yeah. It's what is it called? Astroturfing. So we've gone from censorship to astroturfing, which drives a lot of this. You turn on X and it's outrage farming that day, and then it dies down, and the outrage yesterday was wild on X, and maybe today it'll be normal, but that's part of it. So the real problem with social media, with dating apps, is that dating apps create an environment of false abundance, because you have this idea that, well, so you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter. You connect with this person through a screen, right? They look appealing based on the details they provide, and then you chat with them, and then you hit some sort of, I don't know, you tell a joke that falls flat or whatever, and then it's like, yeah, well, there's thousands of others, so next. And so, and you can do that for a lifetime. It turns people into essentially popcorn. And so I think I see a lot of that where it's like, there are just so many people. I can afford to take my time, and I don't have to hurry. It's like, no, I believe that we're supposed to pursue marriage with intent, with specific intention. As soon as we reach, whatever we might call an age of majority, 18 is the legal age. I think people are maturing much slower nowadays. So I would say somewhere between in your early 20s, maybe. I know college is a very dangerous time for both men and women. It might be 18 to 22 might be the most important ages in any person's life in terms of setting their long-term trajectory. So I don't mean to say that people should just take it as a default that they go to college and just call it good and then pick up the thread when they turn 22. Right. I think that there are some important maturing things that happen in those years between 18 to 22 that should be paid attention to in terms of encountering the real world and the dynamics of how that works when you're to be responsible for yourself. So I don't mean to say that you should just wait until 22 for college, but just understanding that the 4 years of maturity there can mean quite a lot. So I think beginning at that age, both men and women should be righteously pursuing marriage as a very high intention, not above, pursuing God, obviously, but that is our call. And it shouldn't be, well, I'm going to pursue my career, which is what a woman might say, and I'll pick it up when I'm 25 or 30. I don't think that that's God honoring. And I think a man saying, I'm just going to hang around with my bros, for a few years and kind of goof off and whatever, play video games.
That was me, just goofing off and being an immature idiot for a few years in college. And look, I get it.
Yeah, that was me for 20 years. Okay. So like everything that I'm talking about, like these are from my own hard-earned mistakes that God delivered me from. So I'm not sitting here saying that I've lived a perfect life. I definitely have not. God has delivered me from so much, and I give him thanks for it every day. And all I can do is say, hey, don't make the same mistakes that I did. Like
Right.
start looking
Yeah.
for this sooner. But again, and this is also the problem. I don't believe that our society thinks women should be wives. I think what we do is we wait for women's quote unquote biological clock to start going off in their 30s. And then women are like, wow, I really would like to be a mother. And so that kind of, they detect an urgency in that in their late 20s and early 30s. And so then they reluctantly consent to be mothers with their cute little snuggly little babies, but they don't have any desire to actually be a wife and care for a man who can be grumpy and snory and stinky. Like,
Right.
well, I don't actually want to be a man's wife and have to deal with this imperfect man and be forgiving, but I do want to take care of this cuddly, perfect baby. It's like, no, I'm sorry, ladies. Like, you are meant to be wives, and men, you are meant to be husbands. And part of the growth of the Christian life is sanctification and marriage, is part of the forgiveness, is part of the conflict resolution, is part of the recognition of your own limitations. But no one wants to say that.
Right. And I don't even think that culture at large even knows what that means to be a wife or to be a husband. I don't think they even know what that means. They just think it means I'll be in a long-term relationship, whatever even that means. I mean, it's everything's subjective, it seems. There's no defining characteristics for any of this. And then we wonder why so many relationships just don't work out and the divorce rates are as high as there. It's because people don't understand what they're even signing up for. They don't understand the nature of these relationships in the first place and how God created us to partake in these, because they reject God. Of course, if you reject that standard, everything else collapses. And I honestly do believe that dating apps have greatly, they're symptomatic. They're not the cause of any of this stuff, but I think that they've greatly negatively influenced the way that people perceive relationships in the first place and then act in them once they're in them. Because kind of what you said, it's this overabundance mindset where there's so many options and everybody, you're dating somebody and they do something you don't like, and okay, well, I can just leave this person and the next day I can hop on this app and have a new person just like that. And it's literally that easy. Yep. It's literally that easy. And it's especially for women, especially for women, I think, in those dynamics. And as a result, nobody's really committing to anything.
That's
Commitment
right.
just seems to be a lost virtue entirely.
That's right.
I don't know if there's anything to speak into that, but
no, I mean, I think you've nailed it. The idea that, well, I don't, I was talking with this guy. I hear this a lot, from both men and women. And I think the question is one of leverage, where it's very difficult to leverage both men and women into relationships, because there are many cases of lots of Christian men and women who are like, yeah, I dated this person for a while and it didn't work out. And then because reasons, and everyone's like, okay, instead of like digging into that, well, no, what actually happened? It's like, well, he said this, like, okay, so what's wrong with that? Well, I just didn't like it. Well, why didn't you like it? For reasons. Like, well, he didn't actually do anything sinful. There's nothing happened there that's disqualifying. It's like, well, I just wasn't feeling it. It's like, well, your feelings aren't the only factor. I don't mean to say that they're not a factor, but it's a way for people to avoid the imperfections of marriage by holding out for someone who's perfect, which you won't find. You are not perfect. None of us are perfect. And so why are you thinking that you're going to meet the perfect person? And we also don't have a notion of courtship, which is like, I'm going to be engaged in an exclusive process with you to vet your character, whether you are a good mate for marriage. And a big part of that, a huge part of that, is premarital chastity. And we do not talk about that. It is taken for granted that people are going to, God forbid, sleep together. That's generally considered out. But I find that any amount of physical intimacy in general immediately puts the blinders on both people. The hormones get going, and then you can't see the person for who they are, because you're blinded by your own body and spirit wanting to fall in love. And that is not what we were called to do. You're to vet this person for their character soberly, to see if this is the person that you want to spend your life with. Are they who they say they are? Do they do the things they say they're going to do? Are they actually sincere in their faith? But all of these presuppositions of our civilization that, we don't really want to oppress women by making them wives. And of course, everyone needs to have their sexual expression, and everyone needs to take all this time to find out who they are.
Chastity is oppressive, they'll say.
Correct.
It's stripping people from what you hear this a lot, even from the red pill community. It's this: men are supposed to be sleeping around, and not only sleeping around with one person, but with multiple people at any given moment.
That's right.
And as if that's the end all be all of relational dynamics with, between men and women, and that's some source of fulfillment at the end of the day. But what is it, kind of to your point, I think that just leads to men choosing women who are really, really bad for them because they have these blinders on. They're not sober. In other words, like what you said, there's all these hormones pumping, and you're literally not thinking straight in a situation like that. And I think dating apps play into that. It makes that process even easier as well. I can just go sleep. Even in a relationship, it's so easy to cheat now. You can just do that, and no one's the wiser because nobody else sees it, and it's in your little corner of. It's so destructive.
Yeah, it's called a sneaky link, where you're just like hooking up with someone on the sly, and I think there's a popular chant today that a lot of women and feminists do: my body, my choice. Now, the way that it is usually used is to describe abortion. It's my body, my choice. But there's a deeper meaning of that, where we've come as a society to so deeply identify ourselves as beings with our ability to express ourselves freely sexually. In fact, the book Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman is about that. This idea that somehow, probably since the 1960s, but really going back much further to the Enlightenment, the French Enlightenment, the French Revolution as well, that my ability to be free it hinges on my ability to express myself sexually, and the telling me of no, that I can't express my sexuality in such a way, is fundamentally oppressive. And so when you hear women saying my body, my choice, and when you hear about what sexual liberation was about liberating women's sexuality from marriage, because then you could go create this enormous supply of sex that was outside of the bounds of marriage. And so what happens? Demand follows the supply. And so that's where we are, why we are where we are. And so to say, I'm sorry, miss, it is not your body, your choice. It's God's body, and he gets to tell you what to do with it, and men too, right? But again, these are ideas that you can't say. You can't say that a woman's sexuality and a man's is required, is solely demanded in the bonds of marriage. You can't say that. Oh, I get to do what I want. You're oppressing me by telling me I can't do what I want with my sexuality. That is the driving idea of our entire civilization. That's pride parades. That's transgenderism. That's so much of Hollywood, so much of music, so much of advertising, that I can just express my sexuality and it's oppressive to tell me otherwise. Well, it's actually God glorifying. Well, then I hate God. And that's where you get all of this stuff. But no one wants to tell girls your sexuality is for the bonds of marriage. Men too. I don't mean to say otherwise. But no one wants to say that. Women should have their time to have careers. No, you're supposed to be a mother and have children and build a legacy. Well, how dare you say that? That's sexist. That's patriarchal. No, that's like what the Bible says. Well,
they want their cake and they want to eat it too, kind of, where they want the benefits, they want the career, and they want the money, and they want the children, and they want the sexual experience, but they don't want all the sacrifice and service that's supposed to come with it.
Correct. And they want to, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's what I was going to say.
What they want is they want all of those things, and then to just be able to switch them off when they're done having a good time, and then and then a good man's waiting there with flowers. Have you watched the show Severance? No.
So the concept of the show is essentially, do you know what that show is?
I've heard about it. There was a minute where everyone was like raving about it, and then
So this reminds me of that. The concept of the show is where they're putting chips in people's brains and essentially turning their brain off while they're at work. And they have a different reality. So they're called innies and outies. So your outie is like the person that you actually are in the outside world, and your innie is the person that you are when you're at work, specifically at this one company. And the company is trying to essentially, and sorry for spoilers if anyone hasn't watched this yet, but the company is essentially trying to market that as a form of painkiller, where they're going to market to society at large, to where you can put this chip in your brain, and if you're going through an experience you don't want to, let's say you're scared of flying, or you don't like the dentist, or whatever it is, you just flip the switch, and you don't have to experience the negative experience of whatever that thing is. That's essentially how people want to live. in regards to things like this. I think it's very similar. We want all the positive, and we don't want to deal with any of the negative and any of the self-sacrifice, and any of the discomfort is like the ultimate evil. It seems
That's right.
like.
That's right. And there's a quote that's coming to mind. We've been talking about women, and I always want to make sure to talk about men's expression of all this.
Yeah.
When it comes to men leading a righteous life, there's a quote that I try to keep in mind. It's only effort when it begins to hurt. And so if you as a man are trying to build a physically fit body, or if you're trying to build a business, or if you're trying to master a skill, whatever it is, it's not actually effort until you're experiencing pain and discomfort. And so in the same way that women kind of want it all, they want to have all the pleasure and all the fun, all the joy, and then when they're done, switch it off and just have a good man just be presented to them like, oh, easy peasy, right? Men in many ways try to short circuit with their own innie and outie. We're like, well, I've put in enough work today, so now I'm going to check out and play video games for 8 hours, or now I'm going to do porn, or now I'm going to avoid the things that I know that I need to do to build a business or to build an income or to reputation or whatever, to be able to care for a woman. And so to be able to properly support a wife and kids, because there are many men who we are made to want that, we're made to desire that, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily in a place to be able to do that. And men are very good at deceiving themselves about this. Like, I want it, therefore I should just have it. It's like, well, is that actually true? Like, let's look at how you spend your money. Let's look at how you spend your time. Let's look if a woman were to show up in your life right now, or let's say if she were to arrive in your life right now and you were to get married today, and say that she were to get pregnant on your wedding night, right? You get that blessing. In 9 months, would you be, and that's not going to happen, obviously, but like in 9 months, would you be ready to support a wife and kids? Do you have that runway? And if you don't, should you start working your way towards that? Should you start engaging in effort when it hurts to go in that direction? And a lot of men just don't. And that's the thing. So women are out there doing their thing, right? And so men look at that and they're like, well, why can't I just do my thing? Well, the reason why is because that's not the standard. God's word is the standard, right? And this is where the root of bitterness comes in. It's like, well, I don't like that standard. It's like, well, tough. Yeah. You can have something else. God can say to you, thy will be done. And so all of our response as Christians to all of this can't be driven by our own fleshly resentments or bitterness or apathy or laziness or any of that. All of these are very common sins, and it's not unusual. But to say we're going to hold ourselves as men and as women to a supernatural standard, and that's how we become salt and light as Christians. But it's not easy.
I'm with you there. It's the most challenging thing, but it's also the most rewarding thing I've discovered. And I think it's something you don't realize until you're actually in the middle of it. And then, you're like, oh, wow, this is terrible in one sense, actually trying to honor and obey Jesus, especially when it's difficult. It sucks sometimes, it does. But it's also so rewarding, and it's so much more rewarding than any other, Nietzschean path that you might take. Mm-hmm. So to start to wrap up this interview, where more of a positive note here, where would you encourage young men to go and seek out a partner or a future spouse, a wife?
I'm so glad you asked. So I have a number of rules that I developed for myself in order to address this challenge, and they worked because
also not to would be a good follow-up question there.
So I have two rules. One is I'm not opposed to online dating through various righteous means. I think Tinder is a cesspool. I'm not sure too much about Bumble. Hinge tends to have more value-centric people, Christian Mingle, etc. I'm not opposed to those strictly because I think that they are there, and other online dating apps. But what I encourage, or using your own social media profile, but do not do that with anybody who is outside a 30-minute drive from you. So meaning like, oh, I met this girl online and I'm in LA and she's in New York. Don't do that. Don't do that, because what you're going to end up doing is you're going to chat for a number of weeks, and then you're going to have to pay for a plane flight and a hotel just to get together in the room with her and see if there's a vibe, which there might not be. You can have a wonderful conversations online, and then you can meet in person and you guys are both like, oh, and then you're out time and then you're out money. So if you're going to do any amount of online dating, make sure that she or he is within a drive that you could see them the same night and go home. right? Not an hour, not 2 hours. That's still long distance, because like if you want to get together for coffee with somebody to meet them, you want to be able to drive 20 minutes or 30 minutes at the most, and then go home to see if they're worth your time, to be able to vet them in person for in-person chemistry. So online dating is okay, but only in your local area, not online dating and long distance.
I think it can be a useful tool in order to connect with people, to go out and see if there's that in-person connection, and if there's given if there's shared values and things like that. I think that's ultimately the most important thing. Correct. Yeah, I would agree with that.
But if you meet online, don't meet anyone online who doesn't live, again, a 30-minute drive, because if they live far away, then you're going to talk for a number of weeks. And then you're going to have to spend some amount of money to go meet them, and you're already out the time and the money. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. But if you can connect with someone online, and you can just like, hey, we've been chatting for a few days, you want to get together for coffee and see if this is like worth pursuing. That's a very reasonable request. That's a very, very reasonable request. And again, these are from my own mistakes. And if someone says, well, it's too soon, it's like, well, if I just happen to bump into you out there in the real world, it wouldn't be too soon. Why is it too soon for us to meet in person? If the person is in your local area and resists getting together in person,
too soon means they're probably not interested.
Correct. It's a red. Because look, one of the things that's just reality is that well, first of all, on many dating apps, there are a lot of fakes now. Like, this is terrifying that there are definitely fake accounts and bots and all that. Like, that's a real thing that I've seen out there, like videos of that, and you can game them in certain ways to discover that. But also, like, it's true that that for women, like, in many ways, attention is the currency. So she might be chatting with you, and then on the same app, she's got 5 other guys that she's chatting with, and she's getting the simulacra of relationships with all of these different guys. Why should she settle on just one of them? And if you want to go meet her in person, you're forcing her to like settle on just one of them when she's
that. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. For men, attention is a means to an end. For women, attention is the end, right? In many cases, if she's not aware of her own behaviors. So that's rule number 1: is if you're going to do online dating, make sure that he or she is in your local area no more than 30 minutes away, right? Like, you can, as in one night's drive, you can go meet and you can get out of there. So that's one. The second thing is, if you're going to do long distance dating, which is an unfortunate necessity today, because there aren't always people of our age and in our churches anymore for various reasons. A lot of the faithful churches are small. If you're going to do online dating, make sure you can meet them in person first. So my fiance and I were long distance, and so I'm fortunate to be able to move a lot of the things that I do.
Don't meet someone on the internet, for example, and then start a long distance relationship. Okay. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Meet them in person and spend time with them and establish whether there's chemistry, so you know up front whether it'll be worth the investment to try and make a long distance thing work. Because it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. It can be quite expensive. It can be quite disruptive. And, like, it's difficult. There are moments where it's like difficult to communicate even through phone or FaceTime or text message, right? There's a unique challenge with that, but it's a sad reality that we don't necessarily have giant pools of people around us all the time like we did. So I'm not opposed to long distance relationships. Just make sure you can meet them in person. Because one of the things that's weird about photography online is, if you take a photo with your phone, particularly the front-facing camera, like the focal length you're a photographer, so you know this, the focal length of the lens distorts our faces in various ways. There are videos you can watch on YouTube of a way like a 16 millimeter versus a 150 millimeter lens.
You can look like a different person.
Totally different person. Yep. And so when you meet somebody in person, you can see their behavior, you can see their mannerisms, you can see the way they laugh and the way they walk, and you get a better intuitive sense of their character than through a screen. And if there's chemistry, when we find chemistry with somebody, a little spark or whatever, it's like, hey, I kind of like that. That's that initial bit of investment. Like, okay, I'm going to pursue that. And so I'm okay with long distance relationships if you can meet in person and establish whether there's a spark, because that is very rare. So my 2 rules for dating in this modern era, for Christians are, if you're going to do the online thing, make sure they're local. If you're going to do the long distance thing, make sure you meet them in person. And in order to meet, for Christians to meet each other in person, I'm a strong advocate for men and women getting on a plane and going to conferences. Go with conferences with your own particular theological distinctives, right? So go to Grace Agenda, which is where I met my fiance in Moscow in August. Go to Grace Agenda. Go to Fight Laugh Feast. Go to the Founders Conference, the Founders Ministries Conference, or whatever. Get on a plane and go, because if you're a man, if a marriage-minded woman will want to make a similar investment. There are godly men who share my theology who are going to be going to these conferences. And so that's why a lot of these conferences are doing singles mixers now, because they know that, like, well, okay, how am I going to find somebody
so successful, but
some more successful than others, surely. And I have my own perspective on singles mixers. I tell men, don't rely on singles mixers. It's good if a conference has them, but I think singles mixers can also create an environment of false abundance where it's like, oh my gosh, there's 40 men and 40 women here. Like, there's so many options. Like, no. If you're a man, you go to the conference where the women are, and if you see a pretty girl right there, you go up and you talk to her, just like we used to do in ages past. You gotta gather up your courage as a man, and you gotta do the cold approach, and just go walk up and say hi and start talking. That's really all it takes. And so that's, I think that's on the man. That's not to say that you should neglect the singles mixers entirely, but I think so many women have talked about today. They say, no man has ever approached me. And that just used to be like, feminists used to say the male gaze and men are so oppressive.
That is? Like, I've heard that too. Why do you think that? Why do you think that is? It's just, do you think it's because of online dating and people don't feel the need to anymore? Or
we lack social skills.
Yeah.
We lack the ability. We're on our phones all day. We're tapping with our thumbs, and there's an anxious generation, an autistic generation, who they're not socially skilled, and so it's always been scary for men to go talk to women. Always, always, always. In fact, I love this example. If you watch the Lord of the Rings movies, the original trilogy, and you see Samwise Gamgee is looking at Rosie the barmaid, Rosie Cotton, and he's like checking her out in the first movie, right? So then he goes on this big adventure, and they go to Mordor, and he fights a giant spider and Gollum, and he becomes this big hero. And then he comes back to the Shire at the end of the Return of the King, and he sees Rosie Cotton is still there behind the bar, and what does he do? Watch the movie. He's getting ready to go talk to her. He still takes a sip of beer. Even in that moment, he has to take a sip of liquid courage to go talk to her. And so this is just part of who we are as a man, the courage to go face rejection. And that's part of what it means to be a man. And so you as a man in these environments, you have to develop the courage to face rejection. It's not, it'll hurt. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm terrible. That's just part of it.
But I've been there, but you have to do it.
Me too.
You have to do it.
Me too.
There's no other way around it. And
it's so important that you as a man initiate. It's really crucial that in anyone that you're going to be involved with to any degree, even if it's just like I'm vetting you to see if I want to court you or courting or whatever. It's so important. It was so important for me to know that with my fiance, I initiated it. I started the process. It wasn't that someone like just blindly introduced me to somebody, set me up on a surprise blind date or something. It was that I saw her and I asked, like, do you know her? And it's like, yeah, I'll introduce you. So I initiated that process. And that was very important for me as a man to know that I took an active role in my life. And that's so necessary for men today. And that's the positive note that I want to end on. You as a man have to take an active role in your own life. And you cannot let some other guy, some influencer, try to fix things for you. You have to take an active, self-determining role in your own life in a God-glorifying way. And that will give you a sense of ownership over your life and building, and especially if you do it in the sight of God, that will give you true peace and momentum forward in your existence. So I definitely encourage men to not succumb to bitterness, not succumb to apathy, not succumb to idleness or any of that, but to true courage in the light of God and in the light of Christ. You do have that within you. And when you take that on and you fight through the initial initial discomfort of having to overcome your own weakness and you begin building proficiency, you create a sense of momentum in your life. And that's when life starts getting really good as a man, because you feel momentum. Things are working. Oh my goodness.
And you feel more confident as a result, and you're more willing to take on risk because you've seen yourself overcome those fears and have success at times. And, going and asking the girl on the date isn't so scary, or going and applying for that job that you think you won't get isn't so challenging. And it's not, whatever the situation is. And it's courage is this kind of courage seems to be built by slow repetition over time.
That's right.
And I think again, that's a scary thing. That's something that our culture does not value, because we don't value hardship. We don't see that as a positive thing that it often can be, and challenge is a positive thing. We see comfort's like the ultimate God, to kind of what we were discussing earlier. But anyways.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really important, and particularly the idea of momentum. So, with momentum in your life, you can get, this is the expression, with momentum in your life, you can get all the money in the world. But all the money in the world cannot buy you momentum. You can't buy momentum. You have to generate it and create it in yourself. And I'll just give you a quick example if I can. Sure. So I had a men's mentorship coaching business that I was running in 2022, quite successfully in 2022 and 2023. And so, but then as I started to grow in my sanctification, I realized I'm now a Christian man, and that means all the things that I've brought through my own study of masculinity through the manosphere, I can't rely on those anymore. Like these are not solid foundations, especially if I'm going to be coaching Christian men. And so in February of 2024, I got convicted of that, like bang, overnight, and I shut it down. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I have to make sure to do this in a God honoring way. And so over the past, I guess I would say 15, 16 months, I've been rebuilding that, learning biblical counseling and ripping up all the foundations of all the things that I've learned and starting up my men's mentorship business again in a more God honoring way. But the thing is I'm starting it up right now. There's no momentum to it. It's at a dead stop from zero. It was right. Chugging along and all. It's at a dead stop. And so it's quite scary as a man to be like, okay, now I have to take this big thing and start pushing it and pouring my effort into it to begin generating momentum again. And it's like, it's quite a thing that I've literally been working through the past right. couple of days of like,
no, that's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, it's all, I love it. It's my favorite. You can see I've been thinking about these things for a while, but I understand what it is to not have momentum in your life as a man and to overcome your own lack of inertia to create something like that. So
I've been there so many times. It's, exactly. Even recently, like getting into, writing for, Not the Bee and Christian Post and all this stuff I've been doing, and starting up a podcast like this is from scratch. And these are issues and topics and things that I've been studying for years and thinking about for years and reading about for years, but there wasn't any momentum behind it. And I was like, okay, I've learned all of this stuff. I can either sit here and complain about all these problems I'm seeing in the world and in the Christian community. And, obviously on Twitter, we both talk a lot about the whole Christian nationalist woke right phenomenon. I'm, reading about that. I can either sit in my room and in my house and complain about it to myself and to my family and my friends or whoever else, or I can take these ideas and put them on paper and try to help push the ball in the opposite direction and build some momentum. And that's it. Even doing something as simple as this is so incredibly helpful to build courage and to build. I think it's a process of sanctification that I think a lot of men are missing out on because they're just buying in to the grievances and the frustrations and the resentment red pill community that's not really offering them anything in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, for example, look around at the studio that I'm sitting in right now. This didn't come about overnight. You can go back to my podcast and you can go watch, what things look like for me in the very earliest episodes. Like I was in my living room, had
like what I'm in right here.
Exactly. And so what you're looking at right now has come together slowly over time as I've developed and grown proficiency in lighting and video and cameras and running all of this. But that's the thing is, or apply it to whether it be working out, learning to play an instrument, photography, drawing, pick it. Like, of course, when you start out as a man doing anything, you're going to be terrible at it. You may have some early successes and then you have the dip where it's like, oh my gosh, I feel so totally stupid. But it's the ability to push through that as a man, like enduring the suck, as they call it, And that is so fundamental to being a man. In fact, hundreds of years ago, when men were mostly subsistence farmers, and you've got this big plow, like you got to get the bull to start dragging the plow. You got to, whether whip the bull or whatever, or drag the bull, and then the bull starts moving, and the plow starts getting some momentum behind it, and then suddenly it's easier. That is so fundamental to being a man. But there are so many ways that we can punch out of that discomfort into something that gives us a dopamine hit or whatever, as opposed to, no, I'm going to lean into this because it's only effort when it begins to hurt. And that's true. That's true for our sanctification. That's true for our physical fitness. That's true for business building. But that moment when it's hurting and the ability to push through it is so fundamental to being a man. And that's what I think we need to recover. And that I think that's the answer to many of our, believe it or not, to many of our problems in dating. Because a man who does that, who recognizes that he can have influence, not sovereignty necessarily, but influence over his own life. And then you begin working and doing the thing, and then you feel God's blessing come upon you, right, for faithfulness and obedience. And then things really get moving. Then you become a man who attracts women to you. It's like, oh, wow, okay, so now I have actual abundance, and there are more godly women around me than there were before. But you know what? I was driving away with my junky attitude. I was bitter, and I was looking at things I shouldn't have, and I was hanging out with my bros, and we're all like, yeah, life sucks. You know what I mean? It's like, no, I'm having productivity in my life, and I'm feeling the growth and abundance, and like now I'm carrying myself differently, and and I maybe lost a little bit of weight, getting more time in the sun or whatever. And suddenly you discover there are more godly women around you than you realized. But your own, not just your own attitude, but your own inaction was perhaps God keeping them from you. And I really believe that there is abundance in terms of mates, but I think no one's leaning into the discomfort of finding them.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think that if you're looking at the red pill movement specifically, they treat women as if they're ultimately the problem in society, just like the feminist movement treats men as if they're ultimately the problem in society. Correct. And nobody in either equation is taking responsibility for themselves. That's right. And then we're seeing what this is manifesting into.
That's right. Yeah. Like, well, women will say, what about the men? And the men will say, what about the women? It's like, stop pointing at them. Like, yes, of course, that's real. I get it. But you should be looking at Christ. And if you're really doing that, if you're really genuinely doing that, and you're really reading scripture every day and seeing yourself reflected in the mirror, I think that's seeing yourself reflected in the mirror of scripture. I think that's the book of James epistle. Then you end up with a very different perspective on life. It's like, wow, I really don't need to worry about them at all. I really need to be spending more time worrying about me.
Because even if they are the problem, or they mean, like, even if what, let's say, women are doing, or if you're a woman, what men are doing at large is problematic, that's not ultimately the problem that you're facing. I think the ultimate problem you're facing is yourself.
That's right. Yeah. Or we see this around, like, oh, it's the Jews. Like, really? Yeah. Okay, sure. Like, yeah, the Jews made you log on to Pornhub last night. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
He came up out of the bed. It's like, look, no, it's not what happened. It's like your own choice. It's your own choices. And again,
the Jews run the dark stuff on the internet that I'm voluntarily clicking on in the first place. Yeah.
Correct. Like, exactly. That's exactly
really the problem here. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so again, if anyone wants to, anyone, me, you, doesn't matter, anyone, 100% of people, all 360 degrees wants to say that they're being victimized. I'm like, okay, then I challenge you for a month to track every dollar you spend and every 15 minutes. There are all kinds of videos online about how to track your time and see who's really victimizing you. Is it your own choices, or is it, white patriarchal oppression? Or is it the Jews, or whatever it is? I bet you're going to find out, as we all will, that your choices are inefficient and ineffective, and they lead you down the path that you don't want to go on. So fix those first, and then see what happens, especially in a God-honoring way. And you'll find, as is promised in the Psalms over and over again, God will pluck your feet from the net. He will keep you safe from evil. Do you believe that? And I hope more Christian men do.
I mean, I can speak from personal experience. I haven't. I mean, I'm not married. I'm not engaged yet. I'm not dating anyone right now. So I'm not in that category as far as relationships go. Yeah. But I know what that's like in work and other work and things like this, and in journalism and in building connections with people that took me literally picking up a piece of paper, writing down a list of goals, writing down a list of things that I need to study and prioritize, and just doing that. Yeah. And it's led to to one thing after the other, meeting people like yourself, meeting people like James Lindsay, meeting people like Joel Berry, etc. Like that came from putting my pride aside for a second and actually doing the hard work and trying to become competent at a particular thing. And for anyone out there watching this, like that's what you need to do, whatever it is in your life. You're going to find, if not, obviously you're not going to find immediate success, but you're going to find fulfillment and joy, because I think that's what God created us for, is to work towards something, to be many creators ourselves, to bear his image in that way. And there's immense joy that comes from that, at least from what I've experienced.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are too many podcasts, and have been for a long time, where the men sit around and say, well, the women, blah, 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 and there are, of course, lots of women. Yeah. So there are lots of women's podcasts that say, oh, what about the men? Okay, sure, fine. But do you have the courage, the discipline to transcend that and to say, like, okay, no, what about me? Like, what's really going on with me and my heart and the inner man and my own attitude? Right. And the man who takes responsibility in that way, who doesn't point the finger to anyone else. And look, I understand the temptation. I understand the temptation to point fingers at, our boomer fathers or our fallen institutions or feminism or whatever. I understand that. And I don't mean to let them off the hook. I really, really don't, because there is plenty of sin and darkness and evil in the world, right? But the real question, the thing that you have control over, is yourself. And if you aren't willing to assert control over yourself first, you can't complain about the world.
It's the whole clean up your own room before you try and clean up the world. Yeah.
Early Jordan Peterson. It's right. Just what he said. Look, before you want to go crusading to change the world, clean up your room. And that, I think there's some real truth to that. And it's just so odd that we live in a moment where that landed as some brilliant career making insight in many ways, but it's real. Right.
And it just shows how lost society is, that something so simple that has been a timeless truth throughout human history it's been so lost on us today that someone like Jordan Peterson saying that on repeat has built this persona and platform that he is today. And good on him for doing so. I'm not denigrating that at all. But the point I'm making is that's indicative of the society that we live in, how utterly lost we are, and how we've completely thrown basic values and principles like that out the window. And then we wonder why our lives suck oftentimes. And then we blame white supremacy, or we blame the Jewish cabal, or we blame women at large, or whatever it might be. And it's like, no, we have to look in here first. I think that's the ultimate message at the end of the day.
I don't accept anymore men's excuses about being lost. And I understand that our fathers fail us, and I get believe me, I get all that. Many of our fathers fail us. I get that. But there are so many resources available to learn how to do anything. Right. Like, we can all follow whatever podcasts or whatever interesting content, sermons, whatever we follow on YouTube. But if you want to learn anything, just like Google, like how to learn ChatGPT, right? Whatever. And then you will find, or like how to learn to sew, or learning to sail, pick any skill, right? And you will suddenly, the algorithm will bombard you with this entire little micro world of content and influencers and trainings that you had no idea existed. And
that's exactly how I learned how to like play guitar, for example. Back in high school, I went on the internet and went on YouTube and just said how to play guitar. And I just started watching video after video after video. And then I was playing at my church for a while. That's how I learned photography, was just literally YouTube tutorials. Yep. And I built, had a business out of it. And it's like, it's not like what you said. It's not that hard to actually become, especially today with so many resources, it's not that hard to become competent on something. You just have to be willing to put the time in to do it.
That's right. And there's the 10,000 hour rule, which is Malcolm Gladwell, which is mastery, it's sort of a rule of thumb. But don't underestimate the 100-hour rule, that if you just put 100 hours into learning a skill, that's 1 hour a day for just over 3 months. If you put 100 hours into learning any skill, like dedicated focus time, take your phone, turn it off, and then, guitar, you play guitar an hour a day.
Good at guitar in 3 months. Yeah,
exactly. And so it's that close. It's that close. But of course, there are endless distractions. There's endless people interrupting, and learning the ability to say no, is really important. In fact, just an example for me, like this is probably the last podcast I'm going to be a guest on for a while, because I have my own I love having
I appreciate
yeah,
it.
well, for sure, man. But it's like, I have to be discerning. I have a family inbound. I have to be discerning about how I spend my time now. Like, I have to start thinking about these things. Like, okay, is this moving the needle? A conversation like this obviously is. In fact, it's one of the few conversations I've had on someone's podcast where it's like, yes, this is so relevant to today in a practical way. But we have to be discerning about how we spend our time and how we spend our money. But it is that close to begin developing momentum. But do you have 100 days, 100 days of 1 hour a day to go towards a desired goal? I guarantee you, if you have that within you, doesn't matter. Learning guitar, working out, writing poetry, pick something. Do you have an hour a day for 100 days consistently to do that? If you do, you will begin to see what momentum feels like. Oh, wow, this feels kind of good as a man. Well, all these other guys aren't going anywhere. Maybe I'm going to just go this way. Like, bye, bros.
Yeah.
Where are you going? Don't leave our bitter party. It's like, well, I got stuff to do.
And ultimately, I think the caveat here is like ultimately building skills and competence and things, especially as a man. It's not like to do it to get women, to use them, and to do what the red pill people are telling you to do. It's ultimately to be able to serve others better. That's the goal.
And to glorify God.
And to glorify God. Right. Exactly. It's not about you at the end of it. Even something like working out, you're building your physical fitness. You look better. You're more attractive on the outward appearance. But ultimately, what should be the purpose? It's to serve others so that you can be there long-term for your family, so that you can, help your friends move and pick up things when they need to, or whatever it might be. If someone's on the side of the road and they're in an accident, so that you can physically show up there and do something. Like, that's what matters at the end of the day.
Well, like you think about Navy SEALs, like when I was at a Christian men's retreat, and there were a couple of Navy SEAls there, and these were like the fittest dudes. One of the guys was the fittest dude I'd ever seen in person. Of course, you can see lots of stuff online, but to actually see a guy who's like elite peak level fitness is like that's a real thing, because we just don't. No one's ever really seen it all that often, but to see that, it's like, well, why does that guy look that way? He doesn't look that way just for the aesthetics. He looks that way so that he can perform and possibly lose the ability to look that way. Right. You know what I mean? Like he has cultivated his body to be an instrument of service, as opposed to cultivating it for a sense of vanity. Like, I look really great. It's like, no, your body as a man is an instrument of service, and so is it as a woman in different ways. Right, a woman's body is an instrument of service in the production of children and the management of a household. A man's body is an instrument of service for provision and protection, and potentially also sacrificing his life. And so we've lost the ability to think that way in terms of like, well, what am I like? Not only what do I do, but what am I for? I am for giving myself, my energy, and my effort in righteous self-sacrifice. That's what we are for. That's how God made us to be. But instead of serving myself, or not only serving myself, but serving the interests of someone else who's telling me to do something else. Like, you need to show up and you need to march in this thing, and you need to get, rolled by the police because we need to make a political statement. That's probably, well, hey, there's a lot of that.
There's a lot of that.
That's probably not what your body is for. And this is why Scripture provides such powerful guidance against not only false teachers, but also our own mistaken ideas, also the world, the flesh, and the devil, all of that. It's like, what does Scripture say I'm for? Well, how about I just do that? Why don't I just do that and see what happens? And God is faithful. God is very faithful. He keeps his promises to us, not always in the way we expect or on our timeline, but he keeps his promises to us because he promises to do that.
Right.
And so this is the level of Christian teaching, or the subject matter anyway, that I would like to hear, more Christian leaders talking about. But to do that, you have to step pretty hard on some toes of feminism as well. And because it is difficult to motivate men to do that without the promise that there'll be a righteous and godly wife alongside them, but again, that's a faith thing that we accept, that we walk through this fallen world, that we walk through this world where things are not optimal or ideal, or maybe even things look quite dark, but to understand that, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. That's what it says. And so don't fear that, and just keep walking.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you there. Well, this has been good, Will. This has been a really healthy, productive conversation. I think this will benefit a lot of people. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Thank you for taking the time to sit down and have this conversation. I guess kind of to wrap it up, a little bit of where can people find you? Where can people find your resources, things that you've written, videos that you've made and produced, which I've watched many of your YouTube videos. They've been very helpful for me. I'm sure they'll be helpful for others watching this. And so where can people find you?
Yeah, the best way to find me is I would recommend you go to willspencer.co/mentorship, and you can find many testimonials from the clients that I've worked with. And if you like the things you hear, I will gladly help you embed and embody many of these principles in your life. So that's willspencer.co/mentorship. Willspencer.co is my website. You can find more information about my podcast there. And on YouTube, you can find me at Will Spencer Pod. And so those would be the best places to start. And there you can find me on Twitter and Instagram and Substack from those. So just go to willspencer.co/mentorship.
Sounds good. I will definitely link that in the description for everybody here. So anyways, thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you.